This is a public service announcement. I'm going to explain to you young people why Bernie Sanders did not win the primary or is not winning the primary. And this is targeted towards you young people that bitch and complain all the time online about how unfair things are, but don't actually take the time to show up at the polls because you think everything is predetermined. No, it's not. This is specifically addressing to you. If you are one of those young people that actually went and voted, this is not targeted towards you. It is targeted towards the massive amount of young people that bitch a lot and go to rallies and protests, but do not actually show up at the polls. So this is why Bernie Sanders did not win the primary. You know why Bernie didn't win the primary, or he isn't winning? It's not because of the DNC. Yes, they do favor Joe Biden, but that's to be expected because Joe Biden's an actual Democrat, whereas Bernie is essentially an independent posing as a Democrat, hoping to use their platform to get the nominations. So they're obviously going to support one of their own. That's not surprising. Not really even wrong. And yes, I am a Bernie supporter in the Democratic primary, but I don't really see that as like a problem. The reason that Bernie Sanders is not winning is because you're not going to the polls and voting for him. You know, when I actually go to the polls, every time, every single election, I have voted in every single election since I became eligible to vote, all the way back in 2000. Basically 2006. I've voted in every single presidential election. I've voted in every single midterm election, and I've even voted in most of the Wisconsin elections. And it's because of people, because of me and a lot of other people like me, that Scott Walker is no longer our governor. If a couple of thousand of us actually decided to stay at home, that guy would still be our governor, and we would still be way more screwed than we are now. But when I went to the polls, you know what I saw? I saw people from the World War II generation, the ones that are left. I saw a bunch of baby boomers. I saw a lot of some Generation X, but I didn't see too many millennials, which is my generation, or the generation after me, which is Generation Z, which is actually becoming eligible to vote. I didn't see those people at all, almost. So that is why Bernie Sanders is not winning, because I see those people holding up signs and cheering at Bernie Sanders rallies all the time. But guess what? When it comes time to go to the polls, they're not going to the polls. And that's why Hillary Clinton won the primary last time, and that's why Joe Biden is winning the primary this time. Because you didn't care enough to go vote. You cared enough, and you cared enough to go to those rallies, to wave the signs and protest and shout really loud, but you didn't really care enough to go vote. You know, I saw the black voter interview. He stayed in line for 4 freaking hours. Yes, he complained about it, but he stayed in line for 4 freaking hours to vote for his man, Joe Biden. But the thing is, like, no, my generation and the generation below me has an attention span of about 30 seconds. And if they see a line that's more than like 10 people, they're like, see ya, I'm not going to vote. You know what that means? That means Joe Biden deserves to win the primary because his voters are actually committed to him. They will actually stand in line for quite a while to vote him in, whereas Bernie Sanders supporters won't do that, or not enough Bernie Sanders supporters will actually do that. So it's not that America doesn't deserve Bernie Sanders. It's not all of America that actually wants Bernie Sanders. It's that you don't deserve Bernie Sanders because you weren't committed enough to actually stand in line and vote for them. While the other person's supporters, Joe Biden supporters, were willing to wait 4 hours in line to actually vote for Joe Biden. So he has more dedicated and committed supporters who are actually willing to not just wave signs around, but actually go to the polls and do what actually matters. Let me give you a little tip. Going to rallies and protests is great, but you do not get participation points just for going to a rally and holding a sign around. You don't really, get participation points for having fun at a rally. What really matters is what happens at the polls. You know why they have why they have big campaigns to increase turnout? It's because when actually we have elections, the polls are the only things that matters. You don't get partial participation points. Like, you don't get like partial votes for going to rallies and protests. That is useless when it comes to voting, and that is not how our system works. That is not like how dedicated and passionate you are and you rev yourself up at rallies and protests. That is not how you get your representatives in. You go and get your representatives in by going to the ballot box and actually voting. And no, it's not all predetermined. Remember in 2000, in the '08 election, in the primary, the DNC preferred Hillary Clinton over Barack Obama. But you know what? When the convention came, all the superdelegates jumped on the Obama bandwagon because he had more delegates. Even though they wanted Hillary Clinton, it was not predetermined. And since Barack Obama actually had the support of the people, they had to go for Barack Obama. So the person with the most delegates at the convention is going to win the nomination, even if the other candidate actually is favored by the DNC, as proven by Barack Obama. You know why Hillary Clinton won back in 2016? She actually had more delegates. And yes, she did actually have 3 million more votes. You know why Joe Biden's probably going to get the nomination, although it's not too late to change that. You know why Joe Biden's probably going to get the nomination? Because he's going to have more delegates and he's going to have more votes. That's why he's going to get the nomination. It's not because the DNC favors him. It's not because of any of these crazy conspiracy theories. It's simply because he has more votes. And the thing is, I know he has more votes because when I go to the polling station, I just see Joe Biden supporters. I don't see too many Bernie Sanders supporters. You know what? I want to see more of you at the polls. If you really want Bernie Sanders to actually get the nomination in the remaining states that are left, including my state, Wisconsin, which I'm going to actually go vote on April 7th for Bernie Sanders, I want to see more Bernie Sanders supporters at the polls. I don't want to see a bunch of old people at the polls. I mean, they'll be there, so I expect them. I want to see a bunch of young people at the polls, too. And if I don't see a bunch of young people at the polls, then I know who is winning Wisconsin, and I know who's winning the nomination. And here's just an insert message to the DNC. DNC, you're a bunch of idiots for supporting, always moderate candidates. You're essentially trying to support Republican light. Why the hell would they want Trump light when they can just get Trump in the first place, all right? That's not going to work. This is where Trump is smarter than you, DNC. He's figured out that he doesn't actually need to appease the middle. He just needs to appeal to his batshit crazy, base followers to really, rev them up and have them come out to the polls. He just needs to get turnout up for his crazy followers, and then they'll actually have the numbers to actually beat you. He's figured it out. He knows how to get impassionate voters to actually vote for him no matter what. He does not depend on the moderates. He does not depend on the middle. He does not appeal. He is not spending really any resources or time appealing to the middle. He is appealing straight to his base. He throws them red meat all the time, and it's working for him. And you know what? You need to kind of adopt the same strategy. The middle, even people who say they're in the middle, they actually lean Republican or Democrat one way or the other. And it's extremely hard to convince them otherwise. So you know what? You actually need to pound your progressive stances, and you need candidates that can actually pound your progressive stances, especially universal health care. You know why? Because in polls, 70% of Americans actually support universal health care. 50% of Republicans even support universal healthcare, and healthcare is consistently rated either number 1 or number 2 issue. Right now, it's definitely number 1 because of the coronavirus thing, but it's either the number 1 or number 2 issue for most Americans, healthcare costs. And you know what? Those Trump supporters, they want that universal healthcare because most of them are actually really, really poor. I mean, look at the states that he wins the most: Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, West Virginia. Those are some of the poorest states in the country. They are at the top when it comes to poverty rate, and they are near the bottom when it comes to GDP per capita in those states. They are really, really, really poor. And the people there that go for Trump, they're really, really poor too. You don't think they actually want free healthcare? They definitely want free healthcare because they can't afford anything in terms of healthcare, and they want that healthcare. So even though they're pro-Trump, you might actually start turning some of them if you offer, the public option or public health care. And that is something that 70% of America supports. So you should actually ram that issue up the GOP's ass because they can't really defend against it. And because they're completely tied to big corporations and big pharma, and they get a lot of donations, they can't actually adjust their position. So a progressive candidate like Bernie Sanders touting that issue would actually crush them in that department. And that is one issue that America cares about the most. Yes, people might say, oh my gosh, we're afraid of socialism, blah, blah, blah. But that's one type of socialism that they actually want, that a lot of Trump supporters would actually want. So don't be afraid of the universal healthcare thing. Don't be like, oh, we're going to give sort of universal healthcare, but not really universal healthcare. We're going to do this, blah, 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 blah. They're not going to care. They're going to ask, is the healthcare free and am I going to get it? If you can't say yes to those 2 questions, guess what? They're still voting for Trump. So don't give me that bullshit don't give me that bullshit, DNC. You know it's not going to work. You know these progressive candidates actually probably have a better chance than the moderates of actually winning because they will actually tout these issues that people actually want. You know what? Andrew Yang actually got a bunch of cheers on Fox News when he actually went on there because of his UBI. And guess what? Now that we have an emergency, Guess what Trump is implementing? He's implementing UBI because he realized that none of the GOP tactics actually work. So UBI, like these things like UBI, these things like especially universal healthcare, they're extremely popular among the American public. I know you're tied to corporations too, but if you really want to win an election, cut off those corporations. You don't need their donations. Barack Obama essentially won with a lot of grassroots stuff, and you can do it too. If you just pound these serious issues that Americans care about, and you pound universal health care, which most of them want, you will crush the GOP. So you're a bunch of morons for trying to take the moderate position and trying to play GOP light, because it didn't work for Hillary in 2016, and there's a good chance it won't work for Biden in 2020. You actually need to pound your progressive, in your progressive candidates and pound in the progressive policies, because a lot of those progressive policies, those poor people that the poor people that vote for Trump, it would definitely benefit them, and they're going to start voting for policies that benefit them. At least some of them are, and that actually might win you the election. So DNC, you're a bunch of morons. Okay, now that I got the DNC out of the way, back to the national election. The thing is, if you young people would actually vote in the same percentages as the old people, the GOP would never win another election. So here's the divide between the generations. The World War II generation and the baby boomers, they're generally fairly heavily in favor of GOP. The Generation X people, they're kind of split. I think they're more left. I think they're more left than right. They're a little bit more Democratic than Republican, the Gen Xers. Like millennials like myself and Gen Zers below me, we're actually heavily Democratic and heavily liberal. But the problem is there's just as many of us as there are of the older folk. The problem with that actually is that we don't actually go vote. That's the issue. We don't actually go vote, not in nearly as high as percentage as the older people. If we did that, the GOP would never win an election. You would get more representatives and more presidents like Bernie Sanders, because you would actually be able to implement progressive policies. The GOP actually depends on a low turnout rate in years where, in presidential elections. You know that John McCain actually got more votes than Donald Trump, but yet he still lost to Barack Obama because the 2008 election had a much higher turnout than the 2016 election. So basically, a lower turnout generally favors the GOP. A higher turnout means more young people went to vote. So yes, you can actually make a difference. You go vote. So don't tell me it doesn't matter, because it does matter. I'm pretty sure that the powers that be, the DNC, did not want AOC to win against, that fourth top-ranking Democrat in the House. But yes, she did. You know why? Because she got more votes. And if we can get many, many more votes, we can actually get the policies that we want implemented. If you don't go vote, then it's completely your fault. So if only a couple, like in the 2016 election, if only a couple thousand more young people voted in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, we would have a different president in the White House. And you might say, oh, she's just as bad. It doesn't matter. No. It does matter, because we wouldn't be building a wall right now. We wouldn't have separated kids from their families at the border, and we wouldn't have fired half the CDC, which is causing massive problems right now. So don't blame anyone else. You can't really blame the Russians. Yes, they did probably interfere in favor of Donald Trump. But you know what? They weren't the ones that went to the polls and voted Donald Trump in. That wasn't them. They might have bought a couple of ads on Facebook, and yes, that's illegal and all that, whatever. That really doesn't matter, because they weren't the ones. They were not the ones that went to the polls and actually voted Donald Trump in. They didn't vote at all. But you know what the real problem is? The Russians didn't vote, but the problem is you didn't vote either. So, it doesn't really matter because you didn't vote. Yes, I know Hillary Clinton got technically more votes than Donald Trump, but we work through an electoral college system, so we have to beat them in certain states. And the margins in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania were extremely close. So a couple more thousand young people voting in those specific areas would have tilted the balance of power. And it was the same thing with Florida, with Al Gore and George Bush. It came down to less than 1,000 votes to determine the election. So yes, your votes do matter. And the thing is, like, even if you don't like Joe Biden, let's say he wins the nomination because he's on that path right now, and you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, you don't want Joe Biden. You shouldn't sit at home and not vote. You know why? You know why? Because only one of those candidates is building a wall. Only one of those candidates is separating children at the southern border, and only one of those candidates disbanded half the CDC, basically. So sometimes it's about voting for the person that's not going to do certain things that you don't like. So that's why you should actually go vote too. You don't like children being separated at the border. You don't want to waste money on a wall. You don't like half the CDC being disbanded. You want to protect our national parks and monuments. You don't want to go to visit like Frito-Cheeto's Lay like National Park. There's only one candidate that's actually going to make it Frito's like National Park or something. And you should vote for the candidate that is not doing that. So yes, it does actually matter. Yes, the candidate that's up there may not be your ideal candidate, but you should definitely vote for the better of the two candidates that aren't doing the things that you don't like. So that's the thing. So if you're one of those people that bitch all the time online about how things aren't fair and we don't have universal health care and blah, 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 but you don't go vote, well, I'm not going to listen to you because you're not part of the solution. You are part of the problem. Do you know what you can do to be part of the solution? You can actually get off your lazy ass, drag a couple of your friends and get them off their lazy ass, go to the polls and vote. Because if you don't vote, you're not part of the solution. You are indeed part of the problem. All right, that has been your friendly public service announcement. Have a nice day, everyone.